All right, we are live. Hi everyone, Shahin over here. Now, if we could get a message, if you could let us know where you're logging in and if you can hear us, that would be awesome. There's a chat on the right side. If we could, well, Alex, you're there. Yeah, if we could see, there we go, Richard from Melbourne. We got a lot of people signing up from a lot of different places, from Auckland to I think Peru as well for this webinar. Um, all right, Maria from Sydney. Okay, so we are live. This is going very well. Hi, everyone. My name is Shahin. I'm the founder of X Growth and host for today, the Growth Colony webinar. Now, for those of you who are new, Growth Colony is a community of growth specialists and marketers, and we bring everything we bring experts like today. We have Greg on topics around marketing, growth, and sales. So, and today's conversation is about sales and building a sales team, which is quite a critical topic, especially in the B2B space, and it's very intertwined with marketing in the B2B space. So, on that note, before I start, we got a couple of people. If you could tell us, anybody on the chat on the right hand side, if you have questions, feel free to drop that during the webinar in there. We will in the middle kind of answer those questions, but also towards the end we'll go through those questions. So feel free to do that. Also, if you could let us know whether you are in sales or looking at sales from a B2B perspective or a B2C perspective, that would be awesome. Now, on that note, Greg, thanks so much for joining us. And would you tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shahin, for having me. I can't exactly see the screen or lost the video, so hopefully you can hear me. Can you just confirm?
Yeah. Okay. Let me.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing and I'll reshare it.
Well, that's if I can't. Yeah, I'm just getting a black screen, but can everybody else? I can see that, Alex. Can everybody else see the screen? Anybody in the comments?
Yeah. Kevin's all
Okay.
good. David's all good.
All right, we're all good then. I know what you're going to put up anyway, so we'll be fine. So,
Nice.
thanks, thanks Shaheen, for having me, and thanks everybody else for attending. I appreciate you giving us some time on this lovely Wednesday afternoon. So, as Shaheen mentioned, my name is Greg Anderson. I'm the VP of Sales for Tech Target's Asia Pacific business, and Shaheen asked me here because I think I've had a unique experience in sales, having worked in a few different cities, a few different countries, in a number of different roles. Where I started out with Tech Target, this is coming up on my 13th year, as basically a hunter in Boston, where I had a list of 650 small B2B resellers that I would go out and try to sell marketing services to. Before then, I moved to San Francisco to take on some larger global relationships with companies like Cisco and Dell and Intel. And then finally moving to Singapore and Sydney, where I split my time in overseeing and building the sales team across Australia, Southeast Asia, and India. So I've had a really unique experience in seeing kind of all facets of sales. And Tech Target as a business, we've really moved into sales enablement for B2B tech firms. So a lot of my perspective will likely come from that side of things, where we're spending a lot of time now with sales organizations in Australia, in Singapore, in India, who are, just trying to penetrate the market to build up their sales culture here. And that can be organizations that are well established, maybe in North America and other regions that are just trying to build out here. So we spend a lot of time coaching, recommending different strategies for inside sales and outside sales. So we've got a really unique perspective on the type of companies that have succeeded in building these sales teams out, and some of the companies that have struggled. So hopefully I can bring some of that knowledge to you guys and help you out here.
No, absolutely. I mean, I looked at the slides. Thank you very much for that, first of all, Greg. But I looked at the slides, and the topics are super exciting. So love to jump in and dive into the topics. So now, in terms of the slides, you can't see the slides, Greg, right?
I cannot.
Okay, I am going to guide you through this. All right. So we're on the first slide, but the next slide is really on the areas that items that we want to cover. Right. So we're going to cover topics like foundation building, like the foundational blocks for putting a sales team in place. Like, what are the things that you need to take into consideration before making those hires, and common functions of sales and KPIs, importance of sales and marketing alignment,
Yeah.
and hiring best practices and common mistakes to avoid. And really, lastly, talking about sales in Australia and how that landscape look like. But let's jump into the first one, where we're talking about the foundations of building a sales team. So,
Yep.
Greg, what do people need to consider if I'm someone and I'm like, look, I want to build a sales team, I want to make my first hire. What are the things that I need to consider before I dive into it and make that first hire?
Yeah, I think this is the most important part of it. So really laying out the foundation. So, whether you're, a company of one and you've built a great product and you've had some success with customers and now you want to scale that out, or you're, like I mentioned, a well-established organization, maybe in, one particular country or region of the world, and you want to establish yourself in a new region. There's a number of things you need to consider before you even start to hire. So thinking about the foundation is really important. So the first thing that I'd recommend, and we've seen this a lot, is give yourself a real true assessment. Are you a sales leader? Have you built sales teams in the past? Do you understand what goes into that? Or are you the founder of a business maybe that is fantastic with products and services and vision and operations? Be honest about that. And if you don't feel like you're a sales leader with that experience, the first thing you really need to do is go and hire that sales leader. Now, there's a lot of great information that you might want to go and find on how to do that, but I think you definitely want to do that and build out this process from 2 through 5 with that particular sales leader. But once you've done that, I think together with that sales leader, you really need to define playing fields. So what I mean by that is have a real honest assessment. What is the game that you're in? Who are the competitors that you're going after? Who are the players that you need on the fields? And it starts with thinking about yourself. So what type of product do you sell? And the reason that you want to ask a lot of these questions is because this is going to lead you to figuring out who are the personnel that you need to drive your business forward. So what type of products do you sell? Is it a consumable product that is something that you can sell quickly and move on, and then there's no customer service behind that? Is it a subscription model where people need to make a long-term commitment for things and likely require customer service throughout that? Is it a service model where you're coming in and adding value to other organizations' products? These are all really important to specifically define yourself as a business. And once you've got that, really think about your customer personas. Personas gets thrown around, I think, as a word a lot, but this is really important to start as a framework. And now you're not going to be able to completely define every one of your customers within this, but it's important to think about at least creating some sort of framework there. So who is the demographic of that individual? Are we talking about small businesses, or are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about large enterprises? So it's really important to think about that. From a demographic perspective, who are those folks within those businesses, if we are talking B2B, that are going to make that purchase? Is it a HR professional? Is it a sales professional? Is it an IT professional? Think about the type of personalities in the day-to-day life of these particular buyers. What type of organization is it? Are there particular industries that you're really well suited for, that you're going to need some talent to be able to go and make inroads, maybe with government or maybe with education or maybe with retail? And then if you're selling solutions that are tied to either IT or servicing IT, really get an understanding of what sort of tech these organizations are using and where your product can either amplify or replace that. So now that you've got your, who your product is, or what your product is, who your persona is, then you can start to refine that to what your total addressable market is. Now that just comes down to, how many organizations or individuals really are within any particular area that you could in fact sell to that might need your products. How large is that? Are we talking, 50 companies? Or are we talking about 500,000 companies? It's really important to figure out what the opportunity is there. What's the customer purchase process? Is it a 2-week sale? Is it one person that can sign off on this and buy with a credit card, or do you need a procurement team to come and do that? Very important if you're going to be selling to B2B and subscription services. We focus on this a lot. What are the post-sale expectations for success? Now that means from a customer, is it something that they're just going to be able to go and implement and easily use? Is it a consumable, or is it something that really requires adoption in order for it to take flight within an organization and land and expands? Very important to define that. And then lastly, what's the budget you're willing to invest in all this? There's a lot of questions that you really need to ask yourself, but this is information that you really need to figure out. Now, who are the players that we need to go and take this forward? So once you've got that information, it's pretty easy to define what type of functions do you need, individuals from a volume perspective, selling in a volume perspective, selling in a value perspective. Are there particular individuals that are very good at supports throughout a campaign or throughout a sale, or customer success? And then within that, defining some of the types, the personas of the salespeople. Do you need hunters, farmers, consultants, the challenger sale, somebody with relationships? All of these things come into play before you can even start to think about who you're going to go after. Another important piece, and I think we could have a whole separate discussion on this, is really defining the comp structure required to drive the behavior. And now what I mean by that is having a very clear and defined compensation package for sales reps in different functions. Do you need to incentivize somebody to make 150 dials a day, to set 200 meetings within a year? Or do you need to incentivize individuals to land and expand within a few very large organizations where it might be a 6 to 9 month sales cycle with a big payout long term, but there's not going to be much leading up to that? Really think about the right comp structure that's going to drive behavior, keep people happy, and keep people motivated to move forward. And once you've got all of that, then you can start recruiting. Recruit, hire, and recruit. Something that I've learned in building out sales teams here in Australia and Singapore and now India is you really always have to be recruiting. And that's for two particular things. One, you never know when you're going to hit an accelerator to really start growing, and you need manpower to do that. If you don't have a pipeline of candidates and relationship, and you don't have a good feel for what the talent is out there, you're going to set yourself back, 3 to 6 months on that. And inevitably, sales isn't a role where people always stick around too long. We've been very lucky at TechTarget to have folks around for 3, 5, 10 plus years, but oftentimes it's maybe a 2-year role. So, you don't want to get blindsided by somebody who's got a new opportunity, or maybe somebody that just doesn't work out, where you spend all this time training them, and then if they walk away, you've got nobody to quickly come in and backfill that. So just because you've hired doesn't mean your job is done. You start the process all over and continue to do that, assuming and hoping that you're continuing to grow along the way. So a lot of questions you need to ask yourself, a lot of frameworks you need to set in place before you can even go out and start to identify who those candidates are. But if you do that and you do that well, you're going to be able to do the next. Obviously, the most important thing is to bring the right people on board to fill the right functions to fuel your business.
Yeah. No, I think there's so many valuable points over there, and I've come across a lot of businesses who they say, all right, we need a salesperson. And the conversation is, all right, I'm going to go and bring in someone to do sales. And the question then is, what are they going to sell, and who are they going to sell to? And those parameters that you're talking about are not defined. And they, from day one, they're really setting up that salesperson not up for success, right? Really up for failure by not defining those, not defining the ideal customer profile that they're going after, not defining the value propositions that resonates with that customer that they've experienced themselves. So the salesperson comes in and say, so what am I going to say to grab their attention? I don't know. You're the salesperson. Go ahead and do it. So that's really appreciate that. Now, I think on the next slide, we're going to talk about, you touched on it here under point number 3, which is define the role needed to win, where under types, there's hunter, farmers, consultant, challengers, and relationship builders. So in the next slide, we're gonna touch a lot on the type of salespeople, right? And who these characteristics, what are these characteristics, and what you should look for, because I think a lot of people define it's just a salesperson, right?
Yeah.
They could be anything, while there are really specific types of sales that you got to take into consideration, and roles in sales that make or break a lot of organizations. So it would be really cool to have a talk about what type of salespeople are, and what are the differences between these different types of sales roles.
Yeah, and happy to go through this. And a lot of this is, it depends on the business that you have. And not every organization is going to need each one of these core functions. But from my experience, these are really the four key drivers to revenue for any business. Now, this excludes channel sales is a whole different animal, I think, in getting other organizations to sell your product or services on your behalf. But for the functions that you can implement within your organization and control yourself, these are really the four levers that you have to pull. Now, these are different roles and functions, and I'll talk a little bit about how I think that they work together and the type of individuals that are well suited for that, and maybe where they play from a supporting of a particular product. So from left to right, starting with marketing. Now, marketing is one of your primary drivers, especially early on, for pipeline, for sales. But you need to have a very clear definition of what you expect marketing to do. Now, marketing is not just going and putting flyers up and making sure that people know your name, especially in the B2B landscape. Marketing needs to work hand in hand with sales to define that ideal customer profile, and agree on where we're going to actually go and engage these folks. And there's a couple key things that the marketing function will serve. Now, there's only so much they can do as well. I'd say they're, kind of the tip of the spear to go out and focus on the total addressable market. Everybody that you find in that particular region that could potentially be a customer. So they're very much focused on building your brand, and that's just not logos and things like that. That's your brand messaging and persona. As an organization, you need somebody on the team that really understands how to separate yourself from the competition in terms of who you are. They'd be creating collateral for your sales team, both inside sales and outside sales, which we'll get into. Talking about acquisition of contacts and prospects, not necessarily customers at that point. We're talking about the total addressable market, where the marketing team is best suited to go and bring in contacts into your database, into your CRM system, if you're using something like Salesforce. So pulling all those contacts in from the total addressable market. And then simple things like nurture. So sending email invites to these folks, warming them up, letting them know when you have new products out there, letting them know who you are as a business. That's really marketing's role. And then from there, there's a number of sales functions that are really responsible for taking that further. So moving on to what we call inside sales. A lot of people will call that title an SDR, a sales development rep. So what a sales development rep, in my experience, and I think the best function for that is to basically work all of the contacts that marketing is acquiring. They work the total accessible market. So total accessible market, meaning who do you have in your database? Who do they have access to, maybe through LinkedIn if you've invested in something like that. So they're going to be going in and calling into these contacts that you've deemed relevance. They're very much focused on high volume of output in phone and email. And their task is to set up quality meetings, which then you've got another sales function to hopefully take forward. Now, the reason that you would want somebody to set those meetings and then move on is because if you're a B2B organization, there's a lot that goes into meeting prep, meeting qualification, post-meeting sales, and then you get into the actual sales cycle of things. And that can be a lot to take on if you're both setting meetings on your own as well as taking that forward. So if you really want to scale a business, you need somebody to just do real high velocity, understand your value prop, be able to engage a lot of contacts and set relevant meetings. And those meetings would go into either white space reps or key account managers. And if your business isn't large enough to have both, they would just go into what you would call your outside reps. And those reps' role or functions are, to go and take these meetings forward, move them through the sales cycle, and ideally close them. Once you hit a certain scale, you can look at what we would see as a white space rep. Now, white space would be anybody outside of any key accounts that you've identified. Maybe you've identified your top 10 to 50 accounts that you want to focus on with a select few senior reps, and you've got some younger hunters, or doesn't necessarily have to be a younger hunter in that, just anybody with a hunting mentality that is eager to move at a high velocity, engage, qualify, and disqualify, and move somebody through a buying cycle quickly. These are typically your smaller and medium-sized customers, where it's a little bit more transactional in there, and you really just need somebody to be able to speak through your value prop and help your customers understand how to buy. That might be typically your first type of role. And then as you build and as you scale and identify larger customers, doesn't necessarily have to be in organizational size, it could be in revenue. This is where you would focus on your key account managers. And this is where you want to bring in the type of sales rep who understands a complex sale, understands how to work through multiple buyers. They're relationship driven. They know how to multi-thread through an organization, and they're going to be somebody that stays with that customer throughout the entire buyer's journey and post-sale. So these are folks that you want tied to, that top 20% of your customers that are likely driving your 80% of revenue. So all very different functions and very different personalities that you would want to look at hire within that. But again, you might not need each one of these. You really have to go back to what we just talked about in the previous slide of detailing what your business is, who your customers are, what your sales cycle is, and then any one or combination of these functions is really what you need to get started.
Yeah, I really like this slide, pretty much because of the introduction of the role of SDR. I think traditionally and love to hear your opinion on this as well, Greg. In Australia, we see the sales role being a little bit one-dimensional, where you have it's kind of like the BDR who's responsible to create opportunities and kind of close them, and seeing this division that there is one person that is just responsible for booking meetings, and then there is another person who is much more savvier in terms of the nuances of your solution and what that entails, that is going to take that qualified opportunity and close it. I think, is this something that you see is, when you talk to people, this division between sales of making this SDR role in the organization and having a separate BDR role, is that something that you see that a lot of people are kind of surprised when you talk to them about, or you feel like now in the market is pretty well established?
I think mainly in the market that we play in, the B2B tech side of things, it's pretty well established. But I think outside of that, in some of the smaller, maybe other industries, not so much. And I think a really important way to look at that, and we found, especially if you're a business just trying to scale at this point, you don't have many resources that will be tied to onboarding, I imagine. You don't have many resources that are tied to recruiting. You're going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting with that. If you can have somebody that is from an SDR, an inside sales perspective, that's a really good role to introduce them to your company with low risk on their part in terms of not being tied to closing business, but also lower effort on your part in terms of onboarding. You don't need to get somebody trained and spun up on being able to prep for a meeting, execute on a meeting, follow up on a meeting, and hopefully close business in such a short amount of time. You simply need to teach somebody your value prop, give them the tools they need to be high velocity to go out and engage prospects. And through that time, they're going to continuously learn how to speak to your customers, who the right customers are to qualify and disqualify. So it's almost a way to get somebody in quickly and have them onboarding through a role. So the way that we do this here is we want to bring at Tech Target is we have SDRs on board where we tell them that this is meant to be a 6 to 12 month role. And this is a kind of an onboarding type role where you are focused day to day on setting meetings, but also you're joining the sales team and all of the other training meetings, our product meetings. You're learning on the go so that when it comes to the time where we do need to scale and move them out, they're very much ready to dive right into that white space hunter role And even in some cases, they're ready to dive right into that key accounts role because they've been within the company. They understand the value prop. They understand the sales cycle, but it's not a responsibility that we're putting on them to start immediately. So it's a really important role to, one, increase sales velocity, but I also think to teach and train and introduce newer folks to a sales role to see if it's something they're interested in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And look, let's talk about KPIs because you touched on this, and you were saying that hey, you bring an SDR on board, and you don't necessarily put them under a lot of pressure for generating revenue, right? Let's put the
Correct.
marketing component aside because that's a whole different
That's
can of
totally
worms
different.
to
Yeah.
talk about those KPIs. But how does the KPIs of inside sales, white space sales, and key accounts, what do those look like, and how would you measure a success of these roles?
Yeah, so starting with inside sales, from my perspective, I really think that's tied to meetings. So the way that we have it set up is it's simply a volume of meetings that you need to set on a quarterly basis. And if you achieve that, there's a little bonus that comes behind it. Now, that's not meetings that are just set. So these are meetings that have to be held. And the reason that we want to goal it on meetings held is because if somebody's actually going to show up to a meeting, give you 30 to 60 minutes of their time, they've basically self-selected themselves as a valuable prospect. So if somebody's willing to do that, they see the value in your business, they see the value in your product, and they're willing to exchange their time to learn about that. So, if you set somebody their goals only on meetings to be set, meaning that they're just calendared, and then all of a sudden there's a 20% show rate for that, well, then those SDRs aren't setting the right meetings and you're not goaling them, like we talked about previously, on the right behavior. So setting the right meetings is really important. But that's frankly the way that we focus on it. Some companies do have different bonuses for if those meetings close. But what I believe in is goaling people on what they can control. And within that role, what that person can control is setting a quality meeting, and that meeting has to happen. Shifting that over to white space and key accounts, I think that those roles, they're both quota carrying roles. They're both similar in terms of what the end goal is, and that's to bring on customers. So I don't think that you would need to overcomplicate the comp structure on those. But when you want to look at what is the activity or the effort that goes into driving that success that you want to monitor, on a white space, it's volume of opportunities opened and volume of opportunities closed. So this is very much a velocity role. So if you're seeing that, and hopefully you've got a CRM system in place, that they're not opening 2-3 opportunities a week at the very least, and progressing those, that's a big red flag for you. And it's also tied to the number of net new logos. So you can add those as maybe soft goals or working in some bonuses on that. At the end of the day, white space in the BDR is very much revenue driven, but the activities that get there that should be measured is very much more volume of outreach, volume of pipeline, and volume of net new logos. Key accounts is, these are your more senior reps. These are your larger customers that typically have longer, more complex sales cycles. So, those are very much gold. That's where you want to have more, I'd say, higher commission base on that because the deals will be larger and you want to incentivize them to move them quicker. But the overall, like I said, the end goal on that is not too different from white space. But things that you would pay attention to on that are volume of contacts engaged at the larger accounts, volume of meetings set at these larger accounts. Are they spending enough time with these customers? And are they growing them year over year? If you're into your second and third year as an organization and you've got a key account that has been flat throughout that, assuming you've got a scalable product, that's a big red flag for that role as well. So you always want to be seeing some of the growth within those top accounts. Did that kind of answer your question on KPIs and goaling and things like
Yeah,
that?
I think it definitely does. Richard is asking if you can ask questions now or wait until the end. No, Richard, please feel free to ask questions now,
Yeah.
and we'll definitely cover them as we're going through. Now, you mentioned that key accounts. You have a list of companies that you're targeting 10, 50, 100, whatever it is. How do those accounts get to the enterprise account manager, right? So is it something that is it worked with collaboration for the SDR or the BDR to create that opportunity and then close it, and then it's handed over to the executive account manager? Or is it, executive account manager is supposed to, like, that 50, they're supposed to go and try to land those in the first place? How does that work? And then vice versa for accounts that are not on your target account, right? What do you do at Tech Target? Where do those go? Do they have an account manager similar to the ones that similar to accounts that are not part of your target account list, or they just kind of like the BDRs kind of handle them? How do those two situations look like?
Yeah, good question. So if you've done your job in really identifying and defining the playing field of who you can sell to and who you should sell to, then you'll have defined, and this should be something that is always evolving. You'll have defined who those key accounts are, and you want to look at that based off of who is the absolute ideal customer profile for somebody that can invest in us, who can scale with us the most, and who do we want to put our most senior sales resources on. That's really how you start to come up with the enterprise account manager list. But that should be something that's always reevaluated with those reps, with your sales leadership, but also with your marketing team. Your marketing team spends a lot of time understanding trends and looking at competitive situations as well. So making sure that you're focusing and working with them on seeing what does the market look like? Has it changed? But also, have you seen any sort of unique trends in terms of companies that are coming to your sites, coming to your events, engaging with your content that maybe you didn't realize and you had overlooked? So you start by creating that list based off of your assumptions, and then that list grows based off of engagements you see for marketing and trends, and then sometimes with those inside sales meetings that are being set. On the other side, it's pretty much the same answer for the white space and the BDR. So if you've identified your total addressable market, then you want to go out and make sure you've got a list of those companies or the demographics of those companies. And you set your marketing team to go and engage those. So everybody within a certain country or a certain company size, they should be engaging with. The inside sales team should really only be focused on, I think, that white space of the total addressable market, and then that falls into the BDRs. And that's how we have evolved at Tech Target as well, is we want our top account managers to only focus on our top 100 accounts. And we know that's where, realistically 80% of our revenue is going to come from, or does come from now. But identifying the other tech companies globally, as well as the local ones where we have marketing looking at who's sponsoring events. We have inside sales doing active prospecting, adding new contacts and companies to the database and working hand in hand with the BDR to define that total actionable market, for example. That's how we've set it up, and we want to continue to grow our mid-tier long tail of our business, so that that top 100 accounts that drives 80% of our business, maybe that scales to top 150 accounts driving 80% of our business. And through that, we've accelerated our growth, more than double digits each year. So that's how you look at it. You set it as parameters and accounts to start, and then you have to be always willing to change that and reevaluate. Have you made the right decisions on the accounts and the focus of each one of your sales functions?
No, that sounds good. And okay, so the next topic that we got is sales and marketing alignment. Now, we've kind of touched on this a little bit. Obviously, this is an important topic as an organization gets bigger and bigger. Is there something else that you want to cover on kind of the sales and marketing alignment as well, Greg?
Yeah, for smaller organizations, it's a lot easier because I would imagine you're all sitting in the same room. So, sales and marketing are across from each other, identifying who do we want to go and engage and try to sell to this week? What events might we want to sponsor? What type of content do we want to create to reach out to my top prospects with? But as you mentioned, as a company scales and grows, the alignment for sales and marketing is crucial. And, oftentimes marketing is carrying numbers tied to pipeline. This has been a phenomenon, I'd say, in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, where marketing used to be gold on, engaging audiences, driving leads, adding contacts to the database, making sure that your brand is out there. And now a lot of marketers are tasked with pipeline goals. And if you're not aligned to sales in terms of really two things: one, who you agree that you should be targeting and why, then this reps are not going to pick up the the contacts or the accounts you engage with. And then two, what the agreed upon follow-up and expectations of the results of that follow-up are going to be. You're going to start to have a division between sales and marketing, where marketing have a KPI, but frankly that they can't control once they've set campaigns in place. So it's crucial to have that, one, to make sure you're going after the right audience, two, to make sure that you've got the right follow-up, and three, that you've got the right expectations across the board on that. So we see a lot of breakdowns in what oftentimes is a fantastic marketing campaign. And some of the results look great, for us and to the marketer, but to the sales organization, they not so much, because there wasn't an agreed upon follow-up and things after that. So it's really, really important if you're looking to scale.
Yeah, sales and marketing can very easily get at each other's throat very quickly, where exactly the problems that you mentioned come up. Richard asked a question, and his question is: do you think too often that senior executives aren't involved in the KPI decision-making process? I'm guessing this is for sale, and what that outcome is going to look like. What are your thoughts?
I would say that for a smaller company, no, because they would be pretty much involved in everything. But in my experience, what I've seen, I think in the last few years, there's been a lot of tech companies that have landed in Sydney, either from the US or startups from the US, and set certain KPIs in place that the local teams just take and replicate what maybe other regions or countries have put in place. And that's handled locally. Whereas I think the senior executives in North America and the senior executives here really need to dig deep in, going back to what we talked about in that first slide, reassessing the whole total addressable market and what's needed to drive business. Whereas, in some markets you might be more established and have a really strong brands. In a new markets you go into, you're very much unknown. So paying attention to those KPIs and those sales targets based off of those factors is really important. So I do think there needs to be more hands-on involvements with those KPIs. Now, I think they sign off on the KPIs, but I don't think they really dig into why they're being set, the behavior that you're expecting out of that, and is it realistic for for the specific market that you're trying to establish.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, when you see the U.S. market being kind of like probably even more, but 15 times the Australian market. I've heard this multiple times that, hey, our U.S. is doing great and they're getting all these inbound leads, but we're really struggling to get inbound leads. Well, it's a much smaller market, and there are not as many people in there. Therefore, there are less number of people searching for what you're having. So that's very interesting. Now, Jared has another question. What is the best way to build your quote unquote higher pipeline when you're not actively looking for sales staff?
My first response for that would be, you should always be actively looking for sales staff, just because you never know that somebody might come in the next day and not stick around. Or even if you're not ready to have a sales staff yet, you should always be looking and be building relationships that way. So, those are things always have that I'm hiring in your LinkedIn profile. Post that. Make sure that you've got posts up on Indeed or LinkedIn to see what sort of inbound interest that you get. I think other ways you can really do that is look at industry events from a sales perspective, where you can go and you can meet individuals, you can tell them about your business, even going booth to booth at an event where a lot of your competitors may be. A great tactic would be go up to those booths and start to learn about that organization. One, you can get some great intel there. too, you're going to meet a lot of the reps, and oftentimes they're the more junior reps, those BDRs, those hunters that might be a little bit more interested in thinking about something new. So going there, building relationships, handing out your card, understanding the talent pool that's going to be out there. Those are things that you can do that will help you build a pipeline, but also just help you with your business in general. So those are just a few little tips I think that you can work on. But the big thing is you should always be recruiting, always be reaching out and trying to have conversations with people.
Yeah, always those lunch meetings for sure.
Yeah.
Now, look, the other thing that I wanted to ask is common mistakes. Like when people are just starting to hire for sales and looking at sales, what are the common mistakes that you see? I mean, we've touched on some best practices. What are some of the common mistakes that you see?
So I think when people are hiring for sales, there's a few common mistakes. I mean, I think, especially if you're building out your business, hiring does take a lot of time. So trying to automate that process as much as you can. One thing that I found is really helpful is never start with a face-to-face interview or even a video chat. It's a 15-minute phone call is typically all you need to identify if somebody is, somebody you want to work with. Articulate, somebody might want to represent your brand and then to come in. So quick screening process on that I think is really important. So don't always have people coming into the office. It takes up a lot of time. Other things are overvaluing, I think, senior experience. So just because somebody has been in sales for their whole career doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right sales rep for your company, for your industry, or even for today. So there's a lot of individuals that have built phenomenal careers strictly off of relationships, and that's amazing. If you need somebody to come in with, a contact list and to bring some relationships, that's important. But certainly don't overvalue just because somebody has sold and been around. You really need to qualify everybody as if you were qualifying, a junior sales rep as well. Put them through the test of how do they prospect. What's their sales cycle look like? How do they conduct meetings? What's their follow-up strategy? Don't assume they know how to do that. Another one would be pulling people in from your competitors. Now that is, you always want to go there and see who is available and frankly, just to see how their sales teams are structured. But just because somebody works at a competitor and sells a product that is either similar to you or in a similar space, again, doesn't mean that they are right for your business. You need to take culture into fit, and you need to take into consideration that the reason that you exist as a business is that you should fundamentally be a different company with a different value prop and a different culture. So just because somebody's coming from a competitor and might know a bit about that, don't put too much weight on that experience. And then lastly, and I've got a great example of this, is don't discount the intangibles because of lack of experience or relevancy. Intangibles being, a good sales rep is somebody that is eager to learn, eager to solve problems for people, willing to put themselves out there, not afraid to fail, charismatic, all those different traits, very coachable. And we actually had a guy come into our office that was selling chocolate. He walked into the door. There was a bit of commotion down inside of the office, and I looked over, and there was a young man at the end who had a basket of chocolates and was selling to some of the people we had on our team. I called him over and asked what he was doing. He said, I'm a neuroscience major. I'm just graduating, making a few extra dollars on the side, selling this chocolate that I've been doing for a while. I chatted with him for a little bit, and I thought that he just had the right personality, the right everything. So I gave him my card, said that we're hiring for an inside sales role, and to call me back. And 3 months later, we hired him. And he proved to be one of the best that we could hire for that position, quickly moved into an outside sales role, in much shorter than the 12 months that we had typically set. And, had I only been looking for people with interest in sales, background in sales, I would have overlooked this guy. And so, that's a big one. Just don't overlook the intangible. Don't put too much value on experience, and don't undervalue those traits that frankly you can't teach.
I love it. I think you're I love the story of the guy that you hired, but I also definitely agree with you on, a lot of times a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on relationships, and hey, this person has been in the industry for this long, and then we're going to bring them in, and they're going to bring their Rolodex in, and we're going to utilize that. And a lot of times they do that and it just doesn't work. Now that might be because the person is too senior and the company would needs basically someone who's going to generate new opportunity, and the senior person who's
Yeah.
been in the industry for 20, 30 years is just not interested in hustling and going out and picking up the phone and creating those opportunities. And I think we were talking about this previously, where the Rolodex that they have might not be even a good fit for your company, and therefore it just falls flat. We got questions rolling in left and right, so
Yeah.
let's maybe ask a few of those. So Rohan is asking, how do you build a business case, or set KPIs for a new sales hire? Are there any rule of thumbs? For example, should their budgets be 3x their salary? So I think this is more of a BDR role that Rohan is referring to. But yeah, how would you go about creating a case study?
Yeah, I would be careful not to set a finite rule of thumb of a budget needs to be 3x a salary. For example, I think there's a lot of articles that you can read that tie into comp and things like that, but you need to think about your unique situation and not only about the short term, but the long-term value of bringing somebody on that ideally is going to bring in new customers or grow current customers, and what that revenue might look like in 3 years' time. So, it might cost you a little bit more to bring somebody on now in terms of what the investment for headcount is versus the revenue that you might get in the short term. But over the long term, you're investing in the development of talents as well as the long-term value of new customers. So I think you have to consider a lot of those first, and then look at, again, coming back to the total addressable market, is how many more customers could you reach out to? How many more customers could you bring on board if you were able to bring on this new sales hire? We just did that to give you an example internally, as we looked at how many accounts we had in our CRM versus how many we were actually getting to in terms of quality contacts and engagement. And we probably had another 750 and 800 accounts that just weren't getting the attention that they needed to. Marketing was covering them. Our SDR was trying to get to all of them, but we realized we needed to add in a new hunter role because we have to find that there's a lot more opportunity out there for us if we bring in a new headcount. And now the revenue is probably going to be low first year, but bringing in new logos in the short term will typically grow with us over time. So I think you need to start with that. Who the total addressable market is, how many more contacts could you make, how many more logos could you bring on, and don't necessarily look at the short-term value of investing in the capital of a rep versus the immediate revenue impact. Think about 3 years down the line, what that total investment for an individual looks like and what that total revenue is going to look like if you grow customers the way they expect to.
No, that's correct. And do you think it's also important to take into consideration, there's a lot of conversations there, a lot of talk about the fact that it takes time for a salesperson, now in whatever role they're in, to ramp up and be able to show some results. A lot of people talk about 3 to 6 months. And what are your thoughts on that, Greg?
It is. I mean, for us and personally, we see that there is a big changeover in about the 18-month point, to be honest. So there's always immediate impact in terms of bringing individuals in, whether they're new or experienced. But, we work on selling into large tech companies, renewable revenue, spending a lot of time from consultative sales and building relationships. And that takes time. And it typically takes reps about 18 months to really hit their stride, have everything click, to build out a territory that they're comfortable with. So, in that first year and a half, we just very much focus on developing the individuals and giving them all the support they need to try to hit the numbers they've got. knowing that after that 18-month mark, there's typically a big hockey stick in terms of the performance that they have. So factoring that stuff in, goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is think a few years down the line and the value of that investment.
Gotcha. We got Fab, a question from Fab, and this is, I think, goes back to the very first point that you talked about. Fab is asking, any advice for someone new to sales who is the first and only sales hire at a company without an experienced sales leader? What are your thoughts on that?
That is, that's a very unique position to be in, but frankly, that's an exciting position to be in. So, if you're the first one in there, and there is no experienced sales leadership, or if there is sales leadership there, you can kind of help to define that. So take some of the advice we talked about in the first couple of slides of thinking about that playing field, that total addressable market, and really dig in. And actually, you should focus on trying to set that. You could do one of two things. One, you could take the goals that are handed to you and kind of march out the door with those and try to knock all those down. Or you could do that in conjunction with thinking of bigger pictures. How do we build out a sales team here? And there's a lot of great articles that you can go out and read out there. There's a site called SAASTR, SAASTR.org, I think. And talks about building out sales teams. There's a lot of great podcasts you can listen to as well. Sales Hacker is a great podcast. B2B Growth is a great podcast, and Entree Leadership is a great podcast. So, take it upon yourself to go above and beyond, build that sales team out, and build up your experience while you have the opportunity to do that. Not many people have that opportunity. So hopefully it works out for you, because that is definitely a challenging area to be in. But at the very least, be vocal about the targets that you have and how achievable they are, and have some data to back that up.
Awesome. Daniel, is a question that builds on Fab's question. How do you best succeed when you are the SDR or BDR and EAM? So how do you best succeed, Daniel, on all of those, or?
Well, I think we can touch on each of them. I mean, when operating as all of them, when you're operating as all of them within the company. Oh, I see. So that's a big challenge, and I think, frankly, before we as in TechTarget had built out each of these functions, we had and have reps that have to do all three of those. And the toughest thing when it comes to sales is really time management. So I think you need to be ruthless with your time and time management, and be very honest about where you're going to maximize your profits in terms of spending that. So coming in on Monday, making sure you're making a to-do list as to follow up things from last week of what you want to achieve this week, and then segmenting time in your calendar, whereas the morning may be set for the first hour and a half, 2 hours purely on prospecting. So identifying people based off of, LinkedIn or events or things like that you want to go after, and you want to do a lot of outbound there. Middle of the day, typically would be hopefully meetings and things that you set. So working on those, and then later in the day would be follow up and creating proposals and things like that. So, there's a lot of different ways you can structure your time, but the number one thing you have to focus on is being ruthless with your time, segmenting the time you dedicate to each one of those, and qualifying where you spend your time pretty aggressively. Is this a customer I should be spending my time with, or should I go and should I prospect somebody else? It's a challenging position to be in, but it's very much doable. And then hopefully, as you succeed in that, you can help to build maybe an internal business case as to why you need more functions, as to why you can generate more revenue by having some more support.
Awesome. The last question is from Richard, and it's a tool question, which we always get one. What's the CRM you guys use at TechTarget?
Yeah, we're a Salesforce shop, so we use Salesforce here. We adopted it, I want to say, 6 or 7 years ago, and continue to improve our ability to understand where we're spending our time, where we're not spending our time, how we can align with marketing. So it's been really helpful for us to scale exponentially, I'd say, just based off the visibility that it gives. So yeah, I'd highly recommend that, but I know there's a lot of other folks that use a number of different tools like Zoho. I've got some friends that use those for small business, HubSpot and things like that.
No, that's awesome. Oh, I was just about to wrap it up, but we got one more question that popped in. This will be the last question. Can I get your advice on a subscription model I have made? It's a unique way of hiring our consultants.
Yeah, so I mean, Richard, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and send something, I'm happy to take a look at that. We have some subscription models that have worked really well, and I know a number of tech companies as well that have different kinds of models. So happy to take a look.
That's awesome. And that was kind of my last question of, if people want to know more about TechTarget and want to reach out to you, what is the best way to do that? It sounds it's LinkedIn, or is there another way to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I've been telling myself for years that I need to be more active on Twitter, but I am very inactive on Twitter. So LinkedIn, you'll always be able to find me, get a response there. And I've got all my info on there, I think from email to phone as well. So yeah, send a connection, send a message, and I'm happy to help if I can.
Awesome. And before we wrap up, is there any last points you want to cover, Greg?
I mean, the number one thing, just to kind of sum it all up, is we say defining who you are and what the real opportunity is, but then being relentless of finding the right people to drive your business forward. Culture is so important, and I'm really proud of the team that we've built here at TechTarget. Everybody that we have in this office, in our offices around the globe. I think the reason that I've been here for 13 years, and you've got our managing director who's been here for 20 years, is because we've put the right people in the right seats. And that's really, really important when you think about who you want to be side by side with day in and day out, the good days and the bad days. And in sales, oftentimes the bad days outweigh the good. But it's really important to surround yourself with the right people and the right people to represent your business. So adding a body does not necessarily mean adding revenue and adding value to your business. So make sure you're adding the right people to your business, and everything else will take care of itself.
Awesome. Well, on that note, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. And this is going to be the last webinar or event that we're running this year. We're going to have a couple of awesome things coming in for next year, end of January. So please keep a close eye. Now, we are going to be posting the recording of this talk on our Slack channel. So if you haven't joined already, go to growthcolony.org/Slack. And you'll be able to join over there and get access to the events that are coming up, the recordings of past events, and also just meet the rest of the community. So on that note, thank you very much, everyone. Have an awesome December, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you very much, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Shahin. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.